Welcome to our second webinar series on skills that organised by the Oxfordshire Advanced Skills. The idea of the webinar is to create a bit of a community to really sort of share what the different challenges are across industry with regard to skills, and in particular engineering skills. So today we're going to look to the future. We've got two fantastic great guest speaker. Paul Shakspeare was the lead consultant at the Workforce Foresighting Hub, was going to explain to us what he does, and Debbi Sonko, who's from Satellite Catapult, and she'll be talking to us about her experience of doing foresighting. So I'll go over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Caroline. Before I just start the presentation, very pleased to have the chance to talk to you all about this, something of a passion of mine. I'm unashamedly an engineer and take a sort of systems type approach to what often is seen as a bit of an art, which is human resources management. Right, so we go back up a page. So that's still fine? Still okay? Right.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about the skills challenge and something about how we've addressed that as a solution. I'm going to talk to you about the Workforce Foresighting Hub, which is the organisation we work with. And Debbi is going to take you through a worked example of the processes we've developed. And then there'll be a bit of a discussion about how you can get involved and what happens next. So let's hope this continues to work. So what are we all about? It's a pretty simple challenge that relates to the pace of change and the continued development of technologies, the continual change of markets, and the opportunities that creates for growth. And what we're going to look at today is the skills aspect of that, although of course there are challenges across the whole piece everywhere else. The things that drive that change are not often under our control, so technology is the obvious one, but then we have markets and the politics that go around that, and clearly climate change creates pressure for change as well. So a whole number of factors are coming together there, and our job is to try and pick out what matters for skills. So our ambition is to build a skilled workforce for tomorrow's industries. It's really, you'll see this theme coming through this presentation. It's not about what happens tomorrow, it's about what happens in a few years' time, which if we don't take action now, will not happen. So everyone's seen rafts of statistics over the years, endless reports, and they tend to be very much the same from year to year, which indicates we're not doing a lot about the underlying problem. But we now have a new skills body called Skills England, and it's starting off its tenure in that role by understanding that a third of UK job vacancies are directly due to inappropriate skills. So that could be that the people who are currently in those jobs don't have the skills, or the people who are going to enter those jobs won't have the skills. So we need to think about that perhaps as well. So it's a pretty big challenge, and it's a pretty long-standing challenge. And what we've done is try to take a systematic approach to what happens. So current and future challenges are both important, no doubt, to the people on this call, but our role really is to focus on the emerging skills problems related to those changes technology. So I'm labouring that quite a lot, but it is important to address the future before the future becomes today and we haven't done anything about it. So what have we done about developing the solution? I'm going to take you through this in terms of the principles and then a bit of the process. Underlying everything that we do is something that became christened the skills value chain, from work which the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, Gatsby, DFE and others did a few years ago. And what it tried to do was unpick the fragmentation that we often see in our skills system by helping different organisations, different roles to understand how they related and contributed to the whole thing. And so what you see in this diagram is at the start of it, workforce foresighting, which we're going to discuss today, leading into other things like defining occupational standards, developing a curriculum, making sure we have the right qualifications, and pretty importantly is training trainers, teaching teachers, educating educators in order to teach the new curriculum. And at that point, we're ready to scale up and meet the need of employers and individuals for those skills. So this skills value chain is quite an important concept, because on its own, workforce foresighting is essential, but not the whole answer. You could look at this as well in a slightly different way, which is we need to plan for the future, we need to prepare for the future, and then we need to provide those future skills. So that there's a lot of pre-work, and I don't think perhaps our government departments in the past have understood the amount of preparation that's required in order to make changes. So the other thing about this is it highlights the role that catapults can play, because they are very often, and they're similar bodies around the organisation's centres of innovation, they are the people that understand the impact of the innovation, the change of technology, and can contribute that understanding to those people looking at the future skills needs. So we're going to talk about that first step today. What is this workforce foresighting thing? Well, it's a systematic approach, unashamedly developed by systems thinking people, that first of all identifies how organizations will change their capabilities and therefore what skills are necessary to bring those innovative technologies to bear on the markets and the opportunities, and probably whilst they're doing it, increase productivity. Why do we use workforce foresighting? It's because if we don't, we are hampering ourselves in order to anchor the benefits of innovation that we've just talked about in the UK. So really, if you add those two red lines together, workforce foresighting is to enable industry to adopt and exploit the technologies in order to secure the benefits of innovation for the UK. So that's really quite important. And it's also quite important to say that even if we weren't having this conversation, large companies would be doing this sort of thing. Therefore, this is really about involving the whole supply chain, smaller companies, companies like hopefully are on this call, who need to have the barriers to their future participation and success removed. And that's best done in a collective way that we're going to describe today. So the hub itself, the Workforce Foresighting Hub, came out of various pilot studies and reports, but was then funded by Innovate UK as part of UKRI, the research and innovation body in the UK, over a 2.5 or so year period. We're in the second year now, and it was deliberately put together to bring the Catapult network to bear with their technology background to work with groups of employers and groups of educators. And so the hub's role is to bring all of that together. And in order to do that, we've got a number of specialist coaches who work to convene and help. We have strong relationships with the catapults and are looking at widening that group now. And we've got an internal team that supports the program and the marketing and so on. So the Workforce Foresighting Hub is the vehicle under which we are continuing to develop the foresighting processes and the systems and tools, but also to deliver the foresighting cycles with partners. And not just about the cycles, but it's about how we take action from undertaking those cycles. So our vision in doing this, and this really captures a lot of the philosophy of the processes, is to foster how organizations develop their own capabilities. And by that, we mean the things that they do as a business and the workforce skills that are required to adopt and adapt to the continuing change. So we really see what we're doing as a vital stepping stone into a future prosperous UK industry. And I'm now going to explain how we go about that and how we cement that principle of looking at how things are going to change before we start looking at the skills. So the first thing we try and do is interpret and understand the gaps between where we are today and where we might be tomorrow. So this is looking for the differences and the gaps. In some cases, we might undertake the exercises and find there are very few gaps, in which case we are well fitted for the future. However, in most cases, there are some pretty crucial and strategic gaps as we go through the exercise. Having understood that, clearly we need to identify and communicate that to others for them to take action to resolve those gaps. And in some cases, that could be writing a whole new apprenticeship standard. It could be changing several modules in a degree course, or it could be an entirely new short course brought across from another industry suitable for a different sector because it fits their need. So there's a whole range of solutions, but it's about communicating those. And we found in looking at this and in doing this, there's a vital factor of being consistent in our terminology. That means we can look across sectors, look across industries, look across skills. If we have a different language, then that makes that quite difficult. We have benefited a lot by the upcoming availability of cost-effective, intelligent solutions. I can't bring myself to say AI, but that's what we're talking about. And we use those to, as we put it, solve the heavy lifting of lots of data. Anything we do is not simply using those tools. We have human validation of every output, vitally important. No doubt others will have experienced not doing that. So if we look at those, that takes us to an approach which we deliver through a number of workshop cycles in the process. Just to go back a little bit, the focus of what we're doing is in that middle ground. We call that Horizon 2, the 2 to 5 years notionally, but if you're in the software sector, that might be 1 to 3 years. If you're in the nuclear sector, it might be 20 to 30. There's a horizons which fit, but we typically say it's in that 2 to 5 years. If it's mature technology, then there's not a lot we can do to change what will happen in the next couple of years. So, that's a matter of usually turning the volume up on what already happens. If we're beyond the sort of predictable stage, Horizon 3, we call it, the new technologies, things are not certain enough to warrant the investment in the understanding because they might change in the future. So our focus is very much on things we can affect in that middle term horizon. It's a bit of a false premise, really, to talk about Horizon 1, 2, and 3 as if they were isolated. There's a spectrum of activities, and increasingly as we go forwards in this, we realise that we need to connect some of those activities together because that's how employers and industry will do so in the future. We are very, very data orientated. We have accessed, not stolen, but accessed freely because these things are freely available, global occupational data information. Things like, if you're familiar, the ONET system from the States, ESCO from Europe, and of course our own IFATE systems and occupational standards in the devolved nations. So we take that data and we bring input from experts, and we'll come into those groups in a minute, in order to populate what we call grandly a data cube. And that data cube allows us to integrate information from the level of insight right through to effectively prescribing curriculum where there are gaps to fill those gaps. So it's a very powerful tool and is structured using classifications that are highly aligned to the forthcoming standard skills classification work of DFE and the work which we've been doing on capability classifications, which links closely to that. So the data structures are very aligned to the way policy and strategy is going. Just one second. I think it's true to say that if we'd have been trying to do this even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to make the progress we have because of the acceleration of the capability and the reduction of cost of the tools that we're using. And why are we doing this? We're doing it to support national policy. This slide's now going to be out of date as we move into a new world of industrial strategy from this government. So I would expect to see things changing in terms of the focus. Not a great deal. I think we'll probably see more headings, but we'll continue to cover the same areas. On the right-hand side is a fairly mixed list of things that we have already studied, and that list is pretty out of date now, actually, in terms of what's going on. But you'll see they're very varied, from RNA medicines to hydrogen in tanks to floating wind turbine cables. And that's interesting because it shows the breadth of skills need in different sectors, but it also shows that our approach is able to be used across a number of different sectors itself. That is an important facet because it means that we can take data from one sector to another where that's appropriate. So the example I would give you is in the hydrogen tanks work we did. We found a lot of solutions lay in the medical sector where they've got a long history of dealing with liquid gases. So there's a lot of crossover from sector to sector, and we look for that as often as we can. But I would reflect that we expect to see in the next few months some change of focus, but not a fundamental change. So just about to take a deeper dive into the workforce foresighting process itself. And it's part of that first stage where the role of the catapults and similar organizations is vital because they bring the technology expertise to bear. This is a pretty complicated slide, but it allows me to talk through basically the three phases of what we do. And in the first phase, we sort of nail the problem down. What is the challenge that is trying to be addressed by the people who are looking at it? And by a challenge, we mean things like very often government missions of, however many gigawatts of offshore wind energy or zero non-electric cars by 20 something and so on. Those are often clear. In some cases, they're not, and we have to do quite a lot of work to help our customers understand the issues. From having got that clear grasp of the challenge, we can then look at the solutions that respond to that challenge, which are the things that we will foresight. So, for instance, in the wind turbine area, we would look at the need for technologies around floating and flexible cables. Having got that clear consensus and the right sort of people committed, we then undertake a series of online workshops, typically over a sort of 8 to 10 week period, involving the three groups of people we identified earlier, the technology experts, the employers, and the educators. And they've each got a role to build our data sets up that allow us to understand the future needs and the gaps in the current provision. And we produce that information in the form of freely and openly accessible data structures. I'll give you an example later, and reports which you can boil down to one sentence, sort of summary strategic needs. So we range from insight to data, but that's all integrated and connected. And the purpose of all of that is that we do something about a problem in the future. We call it cause action. We don't cause the action. We work with the conveners, the catapults, the sponsors, the industry to help them cause the action based on the evidence that we've collected on their behalf. And that then takes us into the rest of the skills value chain. Don't try and understand these, but they're just an example of how we put the visualization tools together. So numerically, graphically, and these can be tailored to meet needs, but they are highly interactive. So, someone that's got some understanding of how to use the tools can dive in at the level of a current qualification, occupation, and find out how fit that is for the future. They can look at a future occupation and find out what current qualifications are going to help them do that, and so on. So it's highly interactive. And I think the users have found this very, very helpful because the data can all be extracted and processed in their own machines as well. So it's a very data-founded approach. So really just summarising all of that, and I appreciate it's probably quite hard to take on board. So there's lots of stuff on our website that takes this further, and more papers and more webinars and podcasts and so on. But in summary, we're focusing on that Horizon 2, the midterm thing. So it's not too quick for us to affect the change, and it's not too uncertain for the investment in the change to be dodgy. We are founded on common data structures with open access. That's really important, and that's the benefit of this being supported and funded by Innovate UK and working with their partners like iFate and so on. So we focus on future organizational capabilities. what organizations will do, how supply chains will change, and then from that we can understand the skills that are required. The whole point of this is to be ahead of the game, not behind the game when it comes to those future skills. So we call that a leading approach. We do all of this not because we know the answers, but because we can bring the people together that know the answers. And we use the tool sets that are available, but we always validate it with human feedback. So that's the first section of this webinar done. I don't know if anyone's got any questions, Caroline, or if you want to take a quick break.
So there's none at the moment. Please use the Q&A box if you want to ask a question, or I guess people could also unmute if they wanted to do that. There's I think there's capacity to do that today. Otherwise, we can talk to Debbie, and we can make sure that the just continue to put in the question,
Okay.
and we'll have some more at the end of it. Just
shall I pass on to Debbie? So I was about to pass to Debbi Sonko, who works for the Satellite Applications Catapult and who has had the pleasure of working in foresighting, I hope, and we'll take you through some of her views on that. So Debbie, I'll bring up the slide.
Thank you, Paul. It has been a pleasure working with the team. Oh, we've lost the graphic.
I think, yeah.
Oh, here it comes. So we have run one cycle with the Workforce Foresighting Hub at the moment, and we are just about to embark on our second cycle in a different field. Our first cycle was IOSM, so in-orbit servicing and manufacturing, also known as ISAM, renamed internally and externally several times over. And ADR is active debris removal. So we were looking at a challenge which is real in our sector, and it's the removal of debris in space, which includes the disposal and the relocation to a parking orbit, which has been defined in the National Space Strategy. So it's a challenge that's real. We found a sponsor for this, who was Astroscale, who are basically a space rubbish collector, and it was inevitable. It was important for us that we found a sponsor for this that really had the issues that we were trying to address, so skills shortages that would affect workforce in the future, skills shortages in the here and now, and a really active and proactive approach to trying to do something about those, with internal training and with kind of trying to create noise externally as well. So we basically identified that initial IOSM challenge. We then worked through our sets of challenges as Paul's outlined, and we pinned this all on the space strategy and the requirements of the National Space Strategy, and we had to have this underlying reason to get companies to join in. It was really important for us to have a reason why companies needed to join, and we know there's a skills shortage in our sector. It's trying to convene them, and I think this is the thing that this process does really well, is to try and convene everybody who's facing the same sets of difficulties together. We started our cycle, we were off to a slow start, mainly because it was the first program that we'd run on this, but we identified everybody that we needed. We launched in February with our sets of workshops. They are very data heavy, and they do require input from people, but actually the input in terms of what you get out of it is you're putting time in, you're getting an awful lot more back out. We'd run a previous cycle internally, and so Kathy Bowden, our skills lead, she'd run something, and it had taken her 2 or 3 years to get to the stage that we got to in about 6 months. So this is why we joined this really exciting program. Key to this challenge were inputs from Astroscale, who basically have been impacted, and they provided both their technical leaders, but also their HR leaders as well. And Astroscale pulled in other people. We pulled in other people. So we had a variety of SMEs across the sector. We had a variety of educational suppliers throughout the sector. It was difficult for us to get regulators because there aren't so many regulators working in our industry at the moment. But I would say that for anybody doing this, regulators are also key, because there is a lot that comes out for regulation. And already the outcome, so our report came out in the summer. We've created a lot of noise already. UKSA have taken those findings and they've used that to influence their future skills strategy and to build on their requirements, and they're looking to do the same with next steps. Astroscale have also taken the report and the findings from the report and are using that to work out ways to upskill current workforce, work out ways to introduce training courses, and have basically used it for the whole recruitment guide. So it's so beneficial to get involved in something like this. And I hope that I've managed to do it a little bit of justice in this slide here. There is another slide next, which I think has got some details. So this was kind of our journey, which probably maps it a bit better. So we have got previous experience in this. People in Catapult have experience in this. We began in 2022, but we did have a few resource issues. Things were slowed down. So 2023, I came on board as a service delivery manager, and we kicked off properly in 2024 with the actual workshops. And a lot of patience, I must say, from the Workforce Foresighting Hub team, who were guiding us through all of this when we were saying, well, I don't understand that. And, it's really, really helpful to have this guidance and those people that understand what we're meant to be doing, and driving us forward on this, because, stuff like this can get slowed down internally, I think. Our report was published in August, finally, with all of the results, and it's gone down really well. Like, it has been well received. One of the biggest challenges was getting the right people in the room, and to be fully engaged, and I think we underestimated that slightly. We underestimated that incredibly, in fact, but we learned from that, and actually it was better to have a few fully engaged people in the room than lots of non-fully engaged people in the room. But we did have to make flexible adjustments for people, such as they might join for half a session and come back in the next session because maybe their times didn't work. But we managed to get that done. And my key learning from this, I think, is invite lots of people, and then some people will turn up. And those people that turn up, they were really engaged. For us, SMEs in this sector have the biggest to win and the biggest to lose. So for us, the SMEs were important to get in that room. We have moved on to a second challenge. So we have 3 challenges lined up for IOSM, and we also have another challenge sector, which is connectivity, which we're just identifying and working through at the moment and hoping to launch next month, which is our convergence for telecoms, which is slightly more challenging because there are bigger industry players and it's a more widespread industry. But again, we've got some key players, and I think for anyone thinking about doing this, I think what you really need is a bait fish, almost, that's going to hook everybody else in. You almost need to dangle that really good morsel of food in that company, whether it be like a Vodafone or an Astroscale or something like that, and you dangle it and watch the others come towards it. And I think that is the way that you're going to attract people into this. After we've done that, hopefully next year, beginning of next year, we'll go back into the ISAM world, and we'll be looking, I think, at close proximity rendezvous. So I'm learning an awful lot about the space sector as we go, and the team are learning an awful lot too, I think. But it's really key for us, we're aligning with what's going on in the kind of the news and the focus, and different focus groups that we're working with and aligning with what's going on with DCIT, what's going on with UKSA and ESA challenges. So really keeping an eye on what they're doing and the challenges that they've got, so that we can kind of work together and convene and try and pull these resources in to deliver something really, really positive to the industry. And that, I think, is it in a quick nutshell.
Thank you, Debbie. Are there any immediate questions for Debbie?
Thank you, Debbie. So there's a very specific one, but before we actually go on to that, I was, if I may, ask a question around cycles, and so it's obviously, from what both of you are describing, you don't you potentially have to commit for the long run. That it's not just a one size fit all. So can you sort of talk a bit like that? Did you sort of already have the cycles in mind, or is that something that happened after the first cycle? You realized there were other things that you needed to address? Or?
If I can pick that up, I would argue that we're enabling something which organizations like yours, Caroline, like SatApps, needed to do anyway, which is create a view on the workforce of the future in order to facilitate the success of the core business. So in that, the challenges are common challenges across technology, across supply chains, and as we deal with the workforce. So they're known challenges by and large. The solutions are something which we focus on in order to give us a basis for discussion and evaluation within the things that meet that challenge. So as Debbi said, one of their challenges is in orbit. I forget the new analogy, but the in orbit taking bits of rubbish out of space. And within that, there'll be a number of technology solutions like close proximity working and the things that Debbi talked about. So one challenge might have a number of solutions which inform future cycles. I think we will find, and we might be beginning to see signs of this, that there's a law of diminishing returns on the number of cycles because of the common features that come out of them. So maybe having a list of cycles prioritized is, as you say, being in for the long run, but actually it will produce shorter term strategic responses and detailed solutions. That makes sense.
I would add to that. I think that for us, when we started on the in-orbit services manufacturing, we identified 3 areas that we could get buy-in from industry, buy-in from SMEs, but also that we knew there were challenges around. So, for example, the active debris removal, removing space junk, basically, we knew that was a thing. We know that there is also technology for the close proximity rendezvous, which is potentially the next challenge that we'll do in that area. But and we do have a third one lined up, whether we would ever run with that or not. But I think even with 2 distinct areas that we could focus in on for IOSM as a whole, that really does leave us with enough information. Whilst we were doing that, we were also looking for a second area, because what we didn't want to do was run straight into another challenge using our same people potentially and spending a lot more time with them. So we were thinking about where else we could make a difference in the sector. And we know that the connectivity and the connected world is really, really important. So we decided to hook onto that. We have a similar number of possible challenges, but whether we would run them all or not, we're not sure. Again, as Paul says, potentially once you've done 1 or 2, maybe you get your answers, you strengthen your workforce, and those are your responses. But we could come up with infinite more, because I think once you start on this process and you see how powerful it is, you kind of want it for everything.
I think there's another response, Caroline, which is, and we've seen this happen, is that we've tried to address something a bit too early, where there were too few businesses who were prepared to sit in a room and talk about the same problem, because they were still trying to effect commercial advantage. So in a way, being able to find enough people to talk about this is another measure of the timing being right.
Okay, thank you. One of the question was, are we aware that Icarus Mobile Fusion can remove all space debris? Please. I think that's directed at Debbi.
I hope so.
I guess my answer is a one-word answer, which is no. But please do feel free to reach out to me and explain this, because that sounds really interesting.
Okay, so the person that asked the question, if you want to get in touch with myself, I'll put, or maybe Debbie, can you put your email address in the chat? And then then the person can reach out to you if they want to talk further. I wonder if it's useful to talk about cost and, you know, how, because, you know, if we're trying, what's in it for an SME to get involved, and, you know, how much, what would it, I mean, obviously there's clearly a time element, but is there a financial cost associated with getting involved?
The costs of organising the hub and doing the things the hub does are covered by Innovate UK. The costs of the convening body and the technical specialists are covered by Innovate UK. And so there's no cost to participate, and the participation we ask of the different expert groups is typically 2 or 3 workshops over a several-week period, and perhaps some checking of information, but it amounts to, you know, several hours, not several days. So it's not an onerous requirement. The one thing we are finding is if you want to get people together, it ends up with a diary scrummage because we have to find the right thing. So as Debbie said, we do have a policy of selling more seats than we have, because we've found that life means that some people can't make it. So you know, a number of hours, let's say a dozen, over a 3-4 week period. But of course, as Debbie said, that amount of effort then, you know, levers up the effort of everybody else and the findings. So it's a very efficient way of having to do the exercise.
Sure. And why would you say an SME should get involved? Because it's very easy to think that this is a big business problem, and not.
I think it's not to do with skills in the first instance, but it's exposure to a group of people who are working in the market that you're working. Very, you know, venal approach to it, I know, but I think it's being part of a team and actually being able to shape some of the responses. So I think what we haven't majored on today, because it's probably the subject of another seminar, is that what we expect to see coming out of this in order to fill the future skills gaps are not, you know, different 3 or 4 year degree programs, but there may be adding a unit or a module to that degree program, or a short course that you can upskill your current people with. So we're trying to match the need to a unit of effort to upskill, which is more appropriate to smaller businesses than larger ones.
And I'd add to that some of the educators that got involved, some of the universities that got involved in our cycle, have used the resource that we've provided them with in the terms of that final report, to actually go away and use it as a powerful tool to go to their course directors or their heads of department and actually say, look, if we want to be ahead of the game, if we want to be attracting the right students, these are the skills that are lacking in the workplace at the moment. These are the workplace skills that people have identified they don't have. We need to have a holistic approach internally in our university, and this is what we need to do in order to make students work ready for the future. Equally, in terms of the SME question, I think a lot of our players in this sector are SMEs. Maybe 3, 4, 5 people all doing spectacularly good things, and they should be involved because they are the people that struggle the most when it comes to recruitment. They maybe don't have the big budgets to go out and poach other people to come into their sector or into their organisation. I worked for an SME in the Statcoms company before I came here, and attracting staff into a business was difficult as an SME because you were up against very big players who could offer big retentions to keep their staff there. But equally, you couldn't get the right trained people in the first place. So if you were having more graduates leaving, if you were having more people in the marketplace with those right skills, the SMEs would have less of a struggle and would be able to afford better people, basically.
Are you finding that you know, so I, before I was at UKEA, I was working in automotive, and I see a lot of the struggles that we're having that are quite similar to automotive electrification. Are you finding through the work that you've done that there's a lot of commonalities in terms of the skills that are needed, and what are your thoughts in terms of, because I've noticed that a lot of strategies said, oh yeah, there's lots of transferable skills in other sector, let's just go and tap that other sector, which in what I think is a diminishing pool is a very short-term strategy. So any thoughts around that and what the foresighting work is showing?
You probably remember it's a particular hobby horse of mine. If you add up all of the sectors resource lists, there isn't enough people in the country to meet them. So there's obviously going to be some change in what people do in order to keep having the same outputs, the same health service, the same manufacturing sector. So the first answer to the question is that where we are working, the space that we're working is in the interface between the introduction of those innovative, more productive means of answering needs and the people. So that's a really important thing, is we're not simply chasing numbers, we're chasing, if you like, productivity, which I think is a vitally important thing here, not simply for the bottom economic line, but to have enough people to meet the needs of the country. So that's a key issue. And I think the other thing that's really important is the premise of this work is that change to skills provision will be incremental and modular, not wholesale. So that means that we're addressing the current workforce. I was pleased to see recent government green papers and so on reflecting that 80% of the workforce of the next 10 years are already in work. They might not be in the right sector, but they're in work. So we're not going to be training them from start. But a lot of those people in work wouldn't have the opportunity to undertake a long program, whereas they might have the opportunity to undertake a short course. So it's about the mechanisms for change which we can identify, as well as what needs to be covered in that change. I hope that makes sense, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
We were going to go on and cover a bit of how to get involved, but I think we've talked about that quite a lot, haven't we, already?
Yeah, I mean, please.
Shall I just run through the final?
Yeah,
the final
I think that
slides?
sounds like a good option.
Okay. So I think the first slide is that you're never too far from a catapult these days, but there are other organisations that will come into this arena to work in the role of a centre of innovation, convening and supporting things as we go forwards. But the catapults have been an essential stepping stone for the start of this. So looking at those three groups of people we've talked about throughout the conversation, we've just tried to do a bit of analysis to say, why bother? What do we want from you, and how do you get involved? And so we look at the domain specialists, the technologists. We find a lot of those people have got a passion for their subjects, and of course they understand that passing that on through skills programs is pretty important, and that helps shape their work being impactful in the future. And it's really interesting because some of those technologists really have only ever seen the boundary of their room being technology, but once they get involved in this sort of work, they can see that this is a way of ensuring that lasts. Clearly, we're looking for their technical expertise, how things will apply, and the knowledge of the industry. And again, participation in these workshops over that period. So we sort of covered that already. So anyone sitting on this seminar who's got a technology background, don't think that because we're talking about skills, you're prevented from taking part. It's really important we get you involved because you know what's going to happen in the future. We then pick up the group we call educators, and just to make sure it's clear, that's everybody from further education, higher education, in-house learning organizations, commercial learning. It's everybody that helps someone acquire a new skill in the future. And this we think is really important, and we're seeing evidence of this, is that people are participating in these workshops because they're getting early sight of what they could offer in the future. So it's a first mover advantage, really. And they're getting that directly from groups of employers being helped to think through what they need. So it's a very well-founded, as Debbie illustrated, a very well-founded way of finding out what's happening. And of course, the educators are the ones that know how you turn a skills need into a training solution or an educational solution. So that's really important to the whole process. And again, participation in the online workshops over a short period. So each model is the same for each group. And the last lot, one always has to argue the most important lot, but they're part of a partnership in all of this, are the employers, the consumers of skills. And we also usually like to think about the individuals who might consume those skills, because training isn't necessarily always given by an employer. And this is about being ready for that future skills demand that you're going to have if you're going to move into debris removal in space or whatever subject we're looking at. And we're finding that some people are seeing this as a way of influencing their industrial sectors and their groups of people. We expect to see a regional part to this in the future, given how government policy is going, but groups of people who are worried about their future, who can see this being a good way of getting ahead of the game and making sure that the educators provide what they need in future. And what we're looking for here is an element of technical expertise, but how that is then incorporated in your changing organisations as the organisations adapt to meeting those future challenges. Same number of workshops, so relatively efficient way of doing things. We do, at the beginning and the end of each of the cycles, try to get what we call an all-hands meeting together, which provides extra opportunity for these different groups to mingle and work and talk about the shared issues. So hopefully somebody on this call is going, I'd like to do some of this, and the answer is please contact us on the information that's been provided.
I'm saying yes, I'd be interested on the skills side, on the educator side, so I will email you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
I would add that for anyone who wants to be a participant of any of the cycles planned future, I think it is a great way also to network with people, because you do have to work in collaborative, you know, whilst all the workshops are online, so they're very easy to attend. You're working with different people that you've never worked with before, potentially. So you're working with different organisations, you're working with different people. So in terms of networking across your community, I think it's really also very valuable. It helps to build and strengthen that community, and to understand, although you're working in the same area, maybe where the different challenges are coming from. So you might be working with a rival company, but you'll be understanding that potentially they're not so rival at all, and their challenges are the same as yours, which I feel was really beneficial, and it really came out in some of the workshops that we did.
Great, thank you very much. If we don't have, if nobody has any more questions, maybe we'll bring this to a close, give people a little bit of time back. Thank you very much, Paul and Debbie, for a fantastic session. Okay, sorry, I've just been told that basically the chat and Q&A setting is that it depends what your organization setup is like. So apologies for that, but yeah, so thanks Debbie and Paul. I think it's been extremely interesting talk, and I'm sure, you know, so something that's going to continue to be discussed. I really appreciate you giving up your time. For the audience, the recording will be available, so you'll be able to access, and, you know, feel free to share, and we'll find a way to for you to feedback. So we're developing this webinar series. We're very interested in hearing what you would like to hear about, what would be interesting to you. So please feel free to get in touch with us, and And I wish you all a very good rest of the day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.